Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to day 6 of the Ramadan dua Accelerator. Today's dua is a very sweet dua and also one that really proclaims the miraculous nature of dua in and of itself. We're going to jump to Surah Maryam. Even though this is Surah Maryam, we're not going to be talking about Maryam or Isa alayhi salam. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't start off Surah Maryam talking about Maryam's story or the birth of Prophet Isa alayhi salam. Rather, he starts off by talking about the Prophet Zakaria. If you don't know, Zakaria was actually, by the account of scholars, the paternal uncle of Maryam. He also was her caregiver, and he himself was a prophet alayhi salam. He is known to be one of the descendants of Harun and was part of Bani Israel's priestly class. Prophet Zakaria makes the following dua, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala documents it in the Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ذكر رحمة ربك عبده زكريا إذ نادى ربه نداء خفيا قال ربي إني وهن العظم مني واشتعل الرأس شيبا ولم أكن بدعائك ربي شقيا وإني خفت الموالي من ورائي وكانت امرأتي عاقرا فهب لي من لدنك وليا يرثني ويرث من آل يعقوب واجعله ربي رضيا. And the translation goes as follows. A reminder of the mercy of your Lord unto his servant Zechariah, when he cried out to his Lord with a secret cry. He said, My Lord, verily my bones have grown feeble, and my head glistens with white hair, and in calling upon you, my Lord, I have never been wretched. Truly I fear my relatives after me, and my wife is barren. Grant me from thy presence an heir, who will inherit from me and inherit from the house of Yaqub, and make him, my Lord, well-pleasing. So let's talk about the wording of the dua and what is being asked here. Zakaria, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is first saying this, he's presenting this as a story, as the first story in this surah to talk about his servant Zakaria. And the first thing we hear in regards to Zakaria's dua is that he cried out to his Lord with a secret cry. Isn't that interesting to hear? He cried out. When we think cry, right? When you cry out, it's something that's supposed to be loud and in your face and obvious. But interestingly enough, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling this a secret cry. This is to say essentially that Zakaria was making this dua from his heart, like a true desire of the heart. Think about the things that you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you want so desperately, but you don't want other people to know about it. If you cried out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a secret heart, scholars also say that this is supposed to reflect the sincerity of the dua, because when you say something out loud in front of everyone, it can damage the sincerity, and some people are actually doing it for the attention of others. But rather, Zakaria was saying this from his heart directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Zakaria first begins to describe his state. And this is actually something that we are recommended to do when making dua, that you should start off by describing your need for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and whatever you are asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for. He starts off by talking about how he's getting older. He's saying, my bones have grown feeble, my hair has turned white. And then he moves on immediately to praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is step 2. Any dua you make, you should start off by talking about your need, and then you should move on to praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is actually where we get the formula of dua. And by the way, if you guys want a freebie digital download of that formula, link is in bio of all of these Ramadan dua accelerator videos. But he then proceeds to say, and in calling upon you, my Lord, I have never been wretched. Essentially what he's saying is that, Ya Allah, anytime I have ever made a dua, you have always answered the dua. Truly I fear my relatives after me, and my wife is barren. Grant me from thy presence an heir. What is he saying here? Well, Zakaria, according to the tafsir of these verses, is saying that he's afraid that his current descendants aren't going to guide people on the right path towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's afraid that they are going to cause corruption and fitna and misguide people. And he wants an heir. And when he says heir, he actually means someone to inherit prophethood from him. But the issue is his wife is past the age of menopause. By biological standards, she's not able to get pregnant anymore. Now, here's a fun fact. One thing about the prophets, they were not allowed to leave a physical inheritance. So they couldn't leave wealth behind. They couldn't leave money behind. This is actually where the big Sunni Shia debate about Fatima radiallahu anha and her garden comes into play, because there's a one side of the debate that says, well, if it was inheritance and she wouldn't have been able to get it because the Prophet ﷺ was not allowed to leave inheritance, and others say it wasn't inheritance, it was actually a gift that he had gifted her and she was just claiming the gift. But the point is, that's how they understand that when he was asking for inheritance, he's not asking for money or for his children to inherit wealth for him, but rather to have someone to carry on the torch and be a means of guidance to his people. And he's also making a note that this would also be a continuation of prophethood from the descendants of Yaqub, because Zakaria is a descendant of Yaqub alayhi salam, and his ancestors who were prophets were also descendants of Yaqub. There are a lot of prophets that come from the lineage of Yaqub alayhi salam. And make him my Lord well-pleasing. He's ascribing a beautiful quality to this future possible heir that he might have. And that's another really interesting nuance dua, is that Zakaria is almost in his dua, he's forming what he wants to see. It's not just, ya Allah, give me an heir, but it's like, give me an heir who does this and is this. But he still connects it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's just the beauty of the way prophets think about things. Well, this is how quickly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hears him, how quickly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers the dua. In the very next verse, the dua ends, in the very next verse is the answer to the dua, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, Ya Zakaria, inna nubashiruka bi ghulamin asmahu Yahya, lam naj'al lahu min qablu samiyya. Zakaria, we are giving you the glad tidings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying you'll be receiving the glad tidings of a son named Yahya, and nobody has ever been named Yahya before him. What is unique about Yahya in his name is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the one who named him. And another prophet who was also given their name by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was Isa ibn Maryam, Isa alayhi salam. And a lot of you guys might not know this, but they're relatives. They're actually cousins, and they were alive during the same period of time. That's just a fun historical fact that I really found interesting when I had learned it. What's Zakaria's response to this? Remember, he's a prophet. He's already proclaimed that none of his du'as beforehand have ever been left unanswered. He has obviously seen miracles from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being a prophet. What is his response? Well, his response is a bit of a freak out. And he says, Allah, how am I supposed to have a son when my wife can't get pregnant? She's beyond the age of being able to get pregnant, and I'm this elderly man. Isn't it funny? He literally just made the dua with such hopefulness and sincerity in his heart, and then when the answer came, it's so miraculous that he's like, wait, how is this going to happen? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to him something very similar to what he will say to Maryam alayhi salam in coming verses, which is, this is easy for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah created you when you were nothing. Before this, you were nothing. And he made you into a full being. And Zakaria is then given a sign. What do we learn from this beautiful dua? Now, we're probably not going to be making the same dua. We're not prophets. But there are a lot of people who make dua for children. And so this is something that applies. But just as a general lesson to how we think about dua, first and foremost, you remember that remember all the du'as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered for you, even when you thought that the answer coming would be impossible. How often do we make du'a for something and then we completely forget that we ever made that du'a? And then when it comes to fruition, we don't even recognize it. We don't even give hamd to Allah. We don't even give shukr to Allah. We don't say alhamdulillah or we're not thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. Remind yourself how often He has given you when you asked from Him. Number 2, remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a God of impossible. The rules of this universe, physics, biology, all of these things that we know to be, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set them distinctly in the way that they exist. The fact that women, for example, have a biological clock where they're no longer able to get pregnant, that is just a law of biology that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. But remember that Allah is the one who created it, and therefore He can bend and break those rules at His will without difficulty. When you're coming with these du'as that you think are impossible and so difficult to answer, and you're sitting there with this very human worldview of this can't happen, remember who you're asking. You're asking the God of impossible. You're asking the one who designed the rules. It's almost like if you ever want a special exception, who do you go to? You go to the boss, right? Like if, as an example, let's say there's a clinic and it's super hard to get an appointment at this clinic and you need to make an appointment and there's no appointment for the next 7 months, but you know the owner of the clinic. So you go to the owner of the clinic and you're like, hey, I need an appointment. And the owner of the clinic is like, oh yeah, sure, I'll get you in next week. Everyone else has an expectation that you're not getting in for several months, but because you knew the owner, you knew the boss, you got in immediately. What about the owner of the universe? What about the owner of the heavens and the earth? What about the one who decides exactly how everything should be? That's who you're asking. Come with that level of hopefulness. Come with that level of awe and like expansion. One of my teacher used to always say, this was like during some of the hardest times of my life, she would say, Hannah, remember that Allah's storehouses are always full and they're never empty. And her saying that was the motivation for me to make dua for what I thought was impossible. After living life seeing the same thing over and over and over again for years and years and years, I was making dua for something that I thought was impossible. I thought it was never coming. 100% multiple du'as of things that I truly thought were never coming. But I was like, because even though I feel like this, because I know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond that, and I don't want to be held accountable for the sin of limiting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and disrespecting his qualities, I'm just going to make dua. And sometimes my heart wasn't even in the dua. Sometimes it was, because you get that spark of hope and you're like, maybe there's a way out. If you would have told me years ago that this is what life would look like, that the answers to those du'as were coming, I would be like, you're crazy, you're bugging, I don't know what you're talking about. But subhanAllah, that really is it. And this is why it's so important for us to recount the du'as that we've made, the du'as, the things that we've asked for, and always be grateful for when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does answer it. One thing you can even do is write down du'as that you have and keep track of them, and so you have a record that you're able to keep. Remember, even a prophet himself was amazed by the power and might of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in answering the du'as. Don't ever give up on your du'as. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you do, please hit the like button and the subscribe button. If you guys can tell, my voice is a little weak today, but it's okay, inshallah. And please share the series with friends and families, inshallah. Like if you haven't, because it helps push the videos out in the algorithm and helps more people get exposed to the channel and inshallah benefit. I will see you guys next time. Assalamu alaikum.